Hey, Facebook, Instagram. Okay. Let's do this thing. Okay, so I am like almost 15 minutes late, but it's because I really needed to ground and like get my energy in the right space for this. I made the mistake of looking at the comments from my post last night this morning, and I was already going to be taking a bath just because I like to take baths in the morning, but after reading all of the comments from my post, I had to really get into my heart space so that I could come and talk about this topic from a place of grace, which was the entire point of my post yesterday, and to alchemize all the judgment and anger and hate that I was feeling in the comments. So for those of you on Instagram, you can go onto my Facebook and you can see what I'm talking about, because this topic is really heavy and it's really densely filled with what is going on with this piece of hair. Hey, Cindy. It's just a very heavy topic. It's just one of those things that people don't want to hear. They think they have it figured out. They think that they have a right to be so angry. So when I say something like forgive your parents and honor that they were just doing the best that they could, it makes people be really angry and think that I'm telling them how to live their life, which, hello, I'm a fucking life coach. So that's kind of what I do. I take a black light, not just a regular light, but a fucking black light, and shine it on the story that you've been telling yourself for decades even, and show you where you're still living in shadow and where you are not being in alignment, you are not being authentic, you are not living in consistency, you have no fucking boundaries, you don't have any integrity. So for anyone who commented on that or who watches the replay or whatever, just realize that I make a fuck ton of money doing what I do because I'm not willing to sugarcoat the truth, because I don't beat around the bush. I'm blunt and I'm honest, and everything I say comes from the purest, highest level of my heart, so that you can learn how to thrive and live your dream life the way that I am living my dream life, in whatever way that looks for your own destiny. But for you to come at me and say that I don't have a right to say anything to you, then you're more than welcome to leave. You don't need to be watching this. You obviously don't have any agreement in what I'm saying. So go waste someone else's time instead of being so judgmental on my page that you don't even have to be a part of. Like, you're choosing to watch this. So if you're choosing to watch it, then watch it with an openness. Watch it with curiosity. Watch it with the innocence of a child instead of the anger of a hardened adult heart. So with that precursor, let's do this thing. So the topic for today is based on what I said yesterday in my post, which was, what if instead of blaming your parents for everything that's going on in your life, for your childhood, for all the things, you forgave them and honored that they were just doing the best that they knew how to do at the time. And the reason why I say this is because I have spent years in therapy, years. Since I was 25, I had a therapist. And we spent the first couple of years in therapy processing my childhood, and I just owned the story that I acted the way that I acted because I was abused. So I can say this openly because I have had these conversations with my parents. They understand that my divine purpose is to talk about the child-parent relationship, the generational wounding. So I can openly hurt people. Yes, Joanna, yes. People who are hurt other people. That is totally true. So I have had these conversations with my parents. They understand that whenever I talk about my childhood, it's not out of judgment or anger. It's just part of my story. It's part of who I am. It doesn't have any power over me. I don't make excuses for myself because of what happened in my childhood. But I can't erase that that's what happened in my childhood either. So, but that was a really difficult pill for my dad, especially to swallow. He's actually blocked me on social media. I don't know if he's re-added me or not. Our relationship is amazing now that he's not watching everything that I say, because it can be really hard to even forgive yourself, even after you've heard that someone else forgave you. You can still hold so much anger at yourself, and that's a self journey. You have to learn how to love yourself to forgive yourself, and it doesn't matter how many people in your life forgive you if you can't forgive yourself. But that also doesn't mean that the person who forgave you needs to walk on eggshells around you because you can't deal with it yourself. And that's where I've gotten to with both of my parents, because my dad was the one who was more abusive, but my mom was complacent, and she just let it happen because of her codependency, honestly. Which is, again, something that I don't judge her for. I forgive all of them. And the reason why this has come up is because I had never said those words actually to my parents before. I knew it. I had worked on it. I had done it on a soul level. I had done a lot of alchemizing. I had done a lot of work with my own coaches and really worked through it, but I had never physicalized it. I had never taken the time, because everyone says, like, oh, once you cut a cord, they'll feel it on a soul level, or once you forgive them, they'll feel it on a soul level. And it just kept coming up over and over and over and over again to me that I needed to actually say the words. I needed to actually create a physical representation. And so for me, because I love crystals, I actually had 2 different crystals, a rose quartz point for my mom, and a big, I don't even think it was crystal, I think it was painted glass heart for my dad. And I held them both to my higher heart, filled them both with all of my forgiveness, all of my love, all of just gratitude for the amazing life that I did get to live, even though it was traumatic, even though there was a lot of shadow that surrounded my childhood. And then was able to present these gifts to my parents actually just this past week. I gave my mom her rose quartz a few days ago, and literally yesterday I gave my dad his heart, his glass heart. And just said, it was very simple. It was very like, this is for you. I've filled it with my love. I've filled it with my gratitude. I've filled it with my forgiveness. And I want you and I need you to know that I do forgive you, and that I do not judge you, and that I do understand that you were just doing the best you could with what you knew how to do. And I was able to do that now when I wouldn't have been able to do it 6 months ago, or a year ago, or 4 years ago, or even when I was in therapy. Like I said, I was in therapy from when I was 25 till like just last year. So 5 years in therapy, almost weekly. And a lot of it was talking about my childhood and being like, oh, so the reason why I do this is because of blank. So because the reason why I make up excuses all the time is because my mom is the queen of all excuses and thinks that everything in the world is out to get her. And so I was just like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's the reason why I am this way. And that's where like 90% of people stop. As soon as they're given an answer as to why they act some way, they then are able to use it as a justification to continue acting that way instead of moving past it and becoming who they actually want to be. Because I didn't want to be someone who made up excuses. But as soon as I knew that that was why, there were several years where I was just all like, fuck y'all. This is just how I am. This is just who I am. This is how I was raised. There's nothing I can do about it. And that is the lie. So that is what all of the people who commented on my post are not getting. Like, yeah, you absolutely have a right to never forgive your parents and to only do the soul work within yourself and to be good with where you are. But I guarantee you that there is a bigger, better, more amazing, more thriving version of your life that you are ignoring because you don't have the courage to have these conversations in person, or that you're not willing to, or they don't get to have it. Like, so you're holding animosity, you're holding resentment, you're holding anger, you're holding rage, you're holding on to these things that you are then because you're holding on to them, you are teaching it to your children. And there is no around of that. It is a fact. So let's back up before we get into that, because that is the one thing that every single person who was like, no, I can't agree with you, is missing. They're missing the fact that when you don't agree with what I just said, that you need to forgive your parents, you are holding on to it and teaching your children that it's okay to resent you. And you're just going to continue the cycle. You're going to continue the cycle that you are so angry about because you can't get over yourself. It's your ego that is getting in the way 1000% when you are not willing to drop the judgment and to forgive full on and honor that, yes, every single person is just doing the best that they can. Always. And when you can know that, you get to be free of feeling of judgment, a feeling of resentment. You're able to come on and talk about these really heavy topics like I talk about, and know that no matter what the comments are from other people, then it doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter what somebody says to me, because I know that I'm speaking the truth, and I know that I'm speaking from my highest heart. So let's back up a minute and talk about the term epigenetics. Who here knows what epigenetics are? Anybody? So epigenetics is the study of how previous generations can actually affect you and how you affect future generations to come. So your beliefs are the culmination of the previous 3 generations. So I'll use me for an example because it's easier. I was born in 1988. My dad was born in 1959. My mom was born in 1952. Hold on. Wow, I'm realizing I'm pissed her for them dying. Oh, didn't one of these were going to come up. Okay. Before we get into the epigenetics things, guys, one more thing. This last full moon that happened yesterday, or like 12 hours ago or whatever, Scorpio full moon, was filled with, as my freaking internet dies, was absolutely filled with this ending of a 7-year cycle. It was also filled with familial wounds that were ready to be released. So you add the energy of Mother's Day, when a lot of this started coming up for people, especially around the maternal wound, and then you add it to the full moon in Scorpio that was ready to release a lot of familial wounds, and then continue on that Father's Day is only in like another couple of weeks. The fact that all of this family shit is coming up, the fact that you're mad that they're dying, the fact that maybe you're realizing, like for me, that I hadn't actually verbally said some things to my parents, that for months I felt that way, but I never had actually said it to them. It's the reason why it's coming up right now this month between Mother's Day and Father's Day. It's amplified by that full moon in Scorpio. And if you're interested, I can send you a link for an amazing YouTube video. It's like 30 minutes long that my friend Leisha did that really explained so much of why this family trauma shit is coming up, because as a generation, as a whole society, as an entire species, we have been doing enough shadow work collectively that some of these really deep-rooted things, like generational wounds, like how we parent, like how we have treated our children for millennia, is actually ready to be released. And that's an amazing thing to hear. I know that a lot of people were like, Karen, as a dark worker, why are you dogging on the light workers? And that's not what that video the other day was meant to do. The video the other day was just an explanation that we still perpetuate victim mentality because it's not fully understood. But we wouldn't even be able to have that conversation if all of the previous work that was done by like Wayne Dyer, Deepak Chopra, Marianne Williamson, if all of that work hadn't been done and been collectively clearing the shadow, everything that I talk about wouldn't even be possible to be understood. I would be, it would be fucking gibberish to you. You would have no idea what I'm talking about. So absolutely, I'm grateful for every person who's done the work, every person who has started on the way, everyone who is working towards their destiny, because each time you uncover a layer, you're actually doing so much more good than you could ever imagine, because you are healing people who will never have access to this information. Think about the people in the Middle East, or all of those who are illiterate and all of those who don't have internet access. Just by me speaking and using my voice and sending that vibration out into the world, I'm actually able to heal levels for them as well. So I take my role as a healer very, very seriously, and know that it is a global level that I speak the truth on. There is a reason why I speak the messages I do, and there's a reason why I go dark for months at a time and you don't see me on social media, and then all of a sudden I'm on a whole bunch of times in a week, and then I'm gone for like 3 months. All right, so Scorpio, full moon, family wounds. Okay, I shut down on Mother's Day about my mother. Makes sense. Yeah, totally. Lots of people do. And a lot of people freak out on Mother's Day because they're like, oh, my mom doesn't love me. Oh, my. And it's like, that's actually a chance for you to just heal yourself, which is super important. Like I said, if you know that your mom's never going to be able to hear it, then at least do it for you. At least know that you have forgiven her, even if you never tell it to her because she's not capable of hearing it, or they're dead. You can still do some sort of ritual, some sort of something to release that energy out of your quantum field, because you're entangled in them. So let's go back to epigenetics. So epigenetics is the study of being the culmination of the previous 3 generations for you. So my parents were born between 1952 and 1959. My grandparents, pretty much all of them, were born in like 1920 to 1925. And then their parents were born in 1880s to 1890s range. I know that my great-grandfather was 30 when my grandpa was born, and he was born in 1925. So that means what? 1505. So like 1895 was when my great-grandfather was born. So there are still belief systems running on a subconscious level in my DNA that, without me unless I heal and process them, yes, they're going to fall away, but all of the stuff from my grandfather is going to be has been passed on to my kids. And then I can heal, and through the quantum realm, I'm actually healing them as well. So for those of you who don't understand quantum entanglement, very short mini lesson, we are mostly empty space. We mostly are just a vibration. E equals MC squared. So your physical body is the matter that is created by your oversoul, or your higher spirit, or the knowing that passeth all understanding. However you phrase it in your life, your physical body is just a materialistic representation of that higher consciousness. That has all your destinies, all your parallel lifetimes, all your past lifetimes, all your future lifetimes. All of those things are kept in the knowledge of this oversoul, which is individualized and was created eons ago in some star system super far away from Earth. So when you start to learn about epigenetics, when you start to understand that not only are you carrying your own trauma around, or even past life trauma around, but you are actually, the culmination of your beliefs is actually that of 3 prior generations, you can start to understand why you parent the way you parent, or why you were parented the way you were parented. So 1895, 1890s, what was going on during that time? Anyone want to give me like a brief history lesson? I have like something in my throat. So the 1890s, we're looking at the Industrial Revolution. You're looking at like the first car hadn't even been built yet, so the conveyor belt system manufacturing was totally different back then. So during that time frame, like this is Newsies era, right? So you had slave labor. Child slave labor was completely legal and normal, because children weren't seen as the precious little beings that they are now. They were seen as extra hands, and that's it. You treated your children the way you treated your animals. So beating your kids was not only like accepted, it was not only common, it was accepted. For you to just like backhand your kid in the middle of the village square because they weren't listening, no one would blink an eye. Okay? That is something that so many people who were abused as children in the 90s don't understand or want to hear, because they want to have that victim mentality. They want to have someone to blame for why they are the way that they are. I'm getting triggered by you dating child labor. Oh, saying child labor. Yeah. Yeah. So, like I said, honey, this is super, like, this is a heavy, dense conversation that is ready to be heard by those who are ready to hear it. So if you need to pause it and come back later or center yourself or whatever, then you got to do what you got to do. But there, as I always say to everyone, there's a reason why you get to see my lives. I am extremely censored on Facebook. Like, I have 5,000 friends and rarely hit over 20 likes on anything that I post, because what I post about is not light and fluffy and happy. It's really dense, and it's what needs to be heard right now by whoever hears it. So child labor, Newsies, all these things that were happening in the 1800s and prior to that. You think about these families prior to birth control, right? You had Roman Catholic families that didn't believe in birth control, or there wasn't any such thing as birth control. And you would have these huge, huge families, knowing that about half of all of the children born were going to die because of diseases, because we didn't have vaccines, because we didn't have the modern medicine, because you could cut yourself on a hoe that you were using and you would get an infection and you would die from the infection, because we didn't have penicillin, like none of those things. So that was one thing. Like, just to sustain the human population, we were having a lot of children, but only like half of them were surviving to be old enough to have their own children later. So when you look at the global situation of having an overpopulation, it's also because of medicine. It's also because of vaccines. We are no longer weeding out the weaker genetics, because we are injecting this extracellular matrix into people, and then we have an overpopulation problem. When before penicillin was found, and the polio vaccine and all those things, people were dying naturally from diseases and from all these other things. There was never going to be a global wipeout, but we're now stopping that, and like it's overcorrecting to the other side. Anyway, so child labor, just all of these things around our children, they were extra hands. They were hands around the farm. They were hands around the house. They were go out and go do work because your dad got injured on the job, so now you have to go work. We all know that story from Newsies. That's what happened. The dad broke his leg, and that's why the two brothers, David and I can't remember the little boy's name, go out to be newspaper boys, right? And that's what starts the whole strike, is David being like, this isn't fair, and why do I have to pay for my papers that I'm peddling for your paper? But this, guys, this only happened in the last 120 years. So this absolutely is still coded in our epigenetic cells, that treating children like they're cattle is 100% the way that was totally acceptable in pretty much every westernized society. Now, when you go to the Eastern areas and some tribal areas, maybe it's not as much, but I'm talking about here in America. You also have to add in the puritanical side of it, that we are a country that was founded by Puritans. Puritans believed that pleasure of any form is a sin, and if you sinned, then you weren't going to heaven. That means like having honey in your tea was considered a pleasure, and you weren't going to heaven because you had honey in your tea. So anything that was delightful was considered sinful. Now that is a little bit further back. That's your parents. Your parents' epigenetics is their 3 generations. So you're looking at the 1860s, 1840s. Slavery, for the love of God, is coded within your parents' epigenetics. So this is why I say you need to know that your parents were doing the best that they knew how, because they are also affected by the fact that 3 generations prior to them, slavery in America was still normal. It was still completely normal for there to be slaves in America. Your parents' generation 3 going 3 back. No, I let my tea get cold. You guys do that? It's too hot to drink, so you like take the lid off of it, and then when you go to drink it, it's too cold. Anyway, so when you sit there and you think, okay, my parents were raised then by parents who are 3 generations back from that. So that was like, so you only have to go back to my great-grandfather. 3 generations before him is the early 1800s when America was still brand new. And so my great-grandfather was learning based on that, and then taught my grandpa based on that, and he taught my dad based on that. So the fact that my dad hit me and verbally abused me and called me names and made me feel super small and tiny and emotionally neglected me actually makes 100% logical sense. So how can I judge him for it? Especially when I know his family life upbringing, when I know that his parents were extremely abusive, like 10 times worse than, like, I got whacked by a spoon a few times, but I'm an only child and had no friends, so I had no concept of it. So yeah, now a whole bunch of people are gonna be like, Karen, you don't even know what it's like to be abused. Fuck you all. Because every person takes abuse in different ways. So I absolutely felt that I was getting abused like crazy. And I don't remember the abuse that I endured prior to the age of 7. And I also know that my dad got therapy when I was 10. So there is a whole chunk of my life that, because of early childhood amnesia, which is totally a normal part of being a human, it's why we don't remember cutting teeth or the growing pains or night terrors. Because of early childhood amnesia, the parts of my life where my dad was the most angry and probably the most abusive, where I have flashes of being thrown across the room, happened prior to the age of 7, and therefore I can't on a conscious level reach them. So yeah, maybe if I did hypnotherapy or some other shit like that, I'd be able to find it, but I don't need to. I don't need to know those stories. I need to know who my dad is, and I need to recognize and honor who he is. And who he is someone who did the work when I was 10 to stop the abuse and the physical abuse. Okay, the mental and emotional abuse continued, and actually continued on through me living with them, which was up until 2016. He would freak out and scream and try to dominate the household and all these things. So the abuse didn't just stop because I turned 18. I just had to learn how to process it differently. Okay, so then this reaches us to, someone commented, like, did you just see the story on the news about the people who tied up their children and starved them, and there's no way that those parents were doing the best that they knew how to do? Bullshit. I have a special place in my heart for rapists and pedophiles and murderers because no one gives a fuck about them. Everyone's willing to judge them, but nobody actually asks, why were they that way? Well, what did we just learn? Yeah, people who say, sorry, I'm reading a comment over here. People who say your pain isn't painful, quote, because theirs was worse, unquote, are not getting it. Exactly. But JJ, there are people out there who will see what I just said and say, well, I went to school with bruises, and they will definitely compare my trauma to theirs just because of what you said. They don't understand it, and they also think that there's supposed to be some sort of hierarchy of abuse when that's not a thing. Your brain processes abuse however differently. Why is it that some people come back from war with PTSD and some people don't when they watch the exact same event unfurl? How come one woman can get raped and use that as her catalyst to become a multimillionaire, best-selling book author, and another one ends up ODing on heroin within 6 months? It's the same exact event and can even be from the exact same person, and yet it's being processed differently. So yes, absolutely, you can't compare your trauma to someone else's. You just need to recognize your own trauma and and heal it however is the best for you to heal. Absolutely. That's a great point. Rapists, murderers, and pedophiles. So everyone likes to, did they pass like some scientific tests? Oh, did you hear that Ted Bundy was diagnosed as a sociopath and all these things? But it's still so focused on them as a person that most people aren't willing to look at how was that person raised. Oh, they were raised in a really normal household and they weren't abused. Okay, maybe there wasn't physical abuse, but they are actually coming to learn that so many of terrorists, murderers, rapists, pedophiles, they undergone extreme emotional abuse, extreme neglect. Neglect is a killer. If you neglect your kids, which is coming back in fashion with cell phones, you put your kid up there on the playground and just ignore them the entire time you're at the park until you look at your phone and see what time it is and you say, come on, you're not playing with your kid, you just took them to a park. That is neglect. Or letting your kid sit there and scream in her crib while you are finishing up something, that is neglect because her brain can't process time. So a lot of people don't realize that an infant is like a goldfish where there's no concept of time for them. So while you're thinking, oh, just 5 more minutes, babe, I'll be there, I'm just finishing the soup, for her, that's an eternity that's going on while you're letting her scream. And I'm not saying like, don't ever let them cry. Like there's obviously different developmental stages, but how many parents out here have actually studied child development? And I've only done it in the last couple of years, I'll be honest. Before that, when I already had 2 kids, I had never studied the brain processes of children. I had never wondered how my brain is different from my kids. I knew that on a physical level, they were less mature. I knew that I had to teach them to walk and how to talk, but it was pretty much as soon as they learned how to walk, talk, and wipe their own ass that I assumed that they knew how to do everything else. Why don't you behave? Why don't you listen? Why don't you know how to clean up after yourself? Why? Just all these things where they were an inconvenience to me because I didn't understand. Why don't you just know how to do this? Why can't you just figure this out on your own? You can wipe your own ass. You can talk to me. So you should know how to do this. Why are you hitting me? Why are you being violent? My 4-year-old is extremely aggressive. And for a few years, I couldn't figure out why. Like, what is wrong? And then I found out it's because he just doesn't know another way to talk to me. He doesn't know another way to communicate that he's upset. So he immediately goes to hit. And so we've been able to work over the last few years, or the last 6 months especially, on working on different tools to use instead of violence. But I also know a ton of people who would take children the same age as my 4-year-old and medicate them and get them diagnosed as autistic and get them diagnosed as having behavioral problems and get them put onto mood stabilizers and all this stuff just because of, again, the inconvenience. It's inconvenient to have a kid that needs you to slow down and pay more attention to them. Now I want you to really think about what I just said. In this day and age, the autistic rates are skyrocketing because not because of vaccines, not because of anything else, but because our children are super sensitive, more so than ever, again, because of what I talked about, the global shadow has been lifted. So for them, when they're born, they're not dealing with a lot of this global consciousness shit. You think about 10 years ago when there was no way we were going to have someone gay running for someone who's openly gay running for president, or a woman running for president. And now we've got one guy who's openly gay and like 4 women who are running. So because of the global shift, our children are coming and they are not coded with the same shadows automatically. And they are actually teaching us I'm part of it. There's a multi-billion-dollar industry that teaches you how to slow down, how to focus on yourself, how to claim your sovereign power, and to live your life the way you want to live it. Okay? It's called the self-help industry. Okay, Tony Robbins, Marianne Williamson, Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer, all those people have profited millions of dollars. Gabrielle Bernstein, just from taking these wounded children, which all of us are, and helping them heal themselves. So what my purpose on this planet is to do is actually to help moms and dads, so to help the parents teach their kids how to do that from the start. I'm actually putting myself out of business by doing this, because I'm not going to have parents to teach anymore. Because once it becomes normal for you to teach your children to slow down, to pay attention to them, to think things through, to create healthy habits and self-care, and to culminate your purpose, and to have this extreme self-love and this extreme self-worth, and to know that you are the prize, that there's only one of you, and to teach that to our children from a very young age, I'll be out of business. Hopefully, that's the hope. Hopefully I put myself out of business doing the work that I'm doing, because I can't tell you how much it's changed just my personal life to have my 10-year-old be able to know the difference between me screaming because I'm mad, like me being mad at him for something he did, versus me being mad because I have my own shit to work through. Okay, I don't get mad at him for him very often anymore. It happens just because I'm not perfect, because I am still working through epigenetics, generations of wounding. So you hear me say drama, no drama discipline. There's not a single parenting expert on the planet that's going to say that they never have drama with their kids. It's part of being human. But a big part of that is teaching your kids how to feel through those big feelings. What do you normally do for a 4-year-old? Oh, just feel better. It's not that big a deal, buddy. It's okay. And you're actually teaching them that feeling their feelings isn't valid, and that they should just learn how to shut that off. When your feelings are actually really important, and again, there's a multi-billion-dollar industry that is teaching people how to reconnect with those feelings. I don't want to be reconnecting anyone to anything. I think that our kids have the divine right to learn these lessons from the get-go, and that we don't need to hold on to, well, that's the way that I was raised, which brings us back to forgiveness of our generation, of our parents. If you refuse to forgive your parents, you are essentially telling your kids that you are not worth their forgiveness. I'm going to repeat that one more time. If you don't forgive your parents, you are teaching your children that they don't need to forgive you, and that they are not worth the work it will take for you to forgive and heal the generation. Because once you forgive your parents, you're actually forgiving your entire family line leading up to your parents, and you're dissolving from the quantum realm. Oh, I was talking about quantum mechanics. That epigenetic code is now dissolved and no longer affects your kids. So in quantum entanglement, there's this idea that you are not just the culmination of your own thoughts. You're the culmination of all the thoughts of all the people that you've ever held their opinion of, who have ever held an opinion of you that you validated. I needed to hear this so much. Awesome, honey. That's what I love it. So what does that mean? If you've got money issues and you're like, okay, I'm going to work on my money issues, and you kind of work through them, and then you don't ever work on your parents' money issues or your brothers or your grandpa's or any of that stuff, and you're just like, why can't I manifest money? Like, I know that money is just energy. I know that this is how it's supposed to be. I know that I'm abundant and all these things, but you're not working at untangling your parents' belief systems that are in your quantum field, then that can block you from manifesting the things that you desire in your life. So yes, you can walk around and say, I'm at peace with the way that I was raised, but my parents don't get my forgiveness. You're actually not at peace with anything. What you're actually doing is saying that you're worth fixing, but your parents aren't worth your forgiveness, and your kids aren't worth the healing that would happen if you forgive your parents. Because you get to do that. You get to have that ability to heal that epigenetic code within your system. So let's say slavery. Like that's a really heavy thing. My best friend is Black. We've had some pretty intense, deep conversations about racism and slavery, and always from a place of curiosity for me, because I'm just this white girl that was raised in suburban Utah. You know, he's from Compton. Like, he's seen some fucking things. But it's the same thing where he realizes that his parents at the time were just getting through every day. And the hope of even seeing tomorrow was all that was really on their minds, which is how so many of our grandparents lived. My grandfather was homeless during the Great Depression. They lived underneath the train tracks, actually, for a couple of years. Honey, you need to get your dad. I'm serious. No, you need to go get your dad, please. So no one ever thinks about that when they sit there and they're mad at their parents who were born in the 60s. They're like, well, fuck my parents. They were raised during the sexual revolution and they have no right. And by the 60s, we knew not to hit our kids and fuck them. And they don't get to have my forgiveness. Like, that's just the most like egotistical statement that I've ever heard anyone say. And I love the person who said that, like, with so much, like, I love that person. But when she said that, I was just shocked, because that's the ego talking. That's your protective mechanism, and not your higher self, not your oversoul, not the knowing that passeth all understanding. That's straight ego trying to protect you from something that is really fucking painful. It is painful to relive your childhood. It is painful to have to sit there and think, you know what? My dad was raised by someone who knew hardship more than I could ever comprehend, because he was homeless and during the Great Depression, and his dad couldn't find work and he would go days without eating. So then he provided for his family in the best way he knew how and got a college degree and had a nice house in Southern California, but hadn't processed any of the emotional shit. So he was abusive and neglectful. My grandpa would be out for a day at a time having however many mistresses and come back and be screaming. And my grandma would be coked out on the couch and drunk. And my dad would have to endure it and listen to their screaming and their fighting, and ended up teaching himself how to play guitar as a way to focus that, so that he had something other than he could go lock himself in the garage and play the guitar where he wasn't going to hear the screaming, essentially. But it wasn't until this last year, when my grandpa died last year, that I even learned most of this stuff about my grandpa. I, like, literally didn't have any clue about these things, and learning them helped me so much in honoring, like, my dad grew up in a really fucked up house. So the fact that I only got hit with a spoon, or the fact that I only got thrown across the room like once or twice that my subconscious remembers, or the fact that I only, was neglected because he thought it was safer for him to be not in the same room with me as when he was mad, is actually the best he knew how to do at the time. He didn't know any other coping mechanisms. There weren't all these self-help books. He didn't, and even if there were, he works 70 plus hours a week trying to provide for me. He's not been able to go through that healing. So I can do that work. I can recognize those things. I can stop the judgment. I can drop the anger. I can forgive him. And when I do that, every time I've ever done a forgiveness thing around my parents in that energy, I can feel it going through the whole generational bloodline, all the way down to my great-great-grandchildren, who I affect my great-grandchildren. So am I going to walk around angry at my parents, or am I going to do the work so that my great-grandchildren are no longer affected by my traumas and my wounds, and I'm setting them up for their best life? Hold on, forgiveness is so powerful. If you don't learn to forgive, it holds us back. Doesn't matter who it is, parents, siblings, exes, so on. It's like an anchor. Yeah. Honestly, whenever I see anyone say they're not willing to forgive somebody, I just think about that old quote from Rumi or Buddha or whoever that says anger is like a poison that you drink expecting the other person to die. It's a double standard. It's double talk. If you guys have ever read 1984, where you have one thought that it's okay for you to heal, but it's not okay for them, that's a double standard. And living your life with double standards is living your life with no boundaries. And if you don't have boundaries, you can't manifest the life that you want. So you can go around and say, oh, Karen, you're judging people. Oh, Karen, you're telling people what to do. Well, I'm also showing people that through healing, you can create your dream life. Anyone who's watched me over the last 2 years can tell you that I am not the same person. I don't have the same beliefs. I've actually done the inner work to figure out who I am, what I am, how I serve, created those boundaries, created a 5-figure business that I launched at 5 figures, by the way. I didn't just create it. Like, it was 5 figures immediately, almost 6 figures at this point within only less than a year. And have an amazing relationship with my kids, have a child, my 10-year-old asked me why I, like, what did you give grandpa? Because he was actually with me when I gave my dad that heartstone and like pulled him aside and told him that I forgave him. And I told him exactly what I'm telling all of you guys, that it's really important to forgive your parents because it actually helps you heal, it helps them heal, and you can move on, and you're actually helping your future generations. And you know, when your kid says, oh, okay, I get it, and you know that they don't actually get it, versus when they say, I get it, and you know that they really get it. My kid really gets it. He like really understands what I was talking about. So that's, again, confirmation that this work that I'm doing really is healing that line, because he understands that the work that I'm doing is for him as well. Everything, when a parent says everything I do is for my kids, that can be taken so many ways. But by healing myself, I'm actually healing my children and my future generations. So of course I'm going to do the work. Of course I'm going to move mountains for them. Of course I'm going to walk through fire for them, even if it's painful, even if I sit there sobbing for an hour. It was actually harder for me, guys, I'll be honest. It was harder for me to forgive my mom than it was for me to forgive my dad. Because my mom wasn't raised in an abusive household. My mom wasn't raised with a lot of anger and fucked up situations. Like, my mom's dad had a stroke, a couple of them. My mom's parents like smoked cigarettes around her, but I have never heard about abuse when it comes to her childhood at all. So for her to have stood idly by, from my perspective as a child, no, I'm not, again, I don't know. I don't know how many times she took a hit for me. I don't know how many times she blocked my body or my dad's body from mine. I don't know how many times she got him away from me and dealt with it herself. But from my perspective, which is all the perspective that I can really know, she allowed the abuse to happen. That she wasn't strong enough to leave him. Because there were several times that he walked out and I was like, thank God that monster is gone. And then she would let him back into the house and I would have to endure more abuse. Or she would, there's just all these things that happen where I'm like, why are you not divorcing him? Why are you not leaving him? Why are you not strong enough to do this? Don't you care about me? Aren't I worth you doing this? And she just wasn't. She's an amazing woman. I love my mom. She has done so many amazing things in my life. She pretty much raised my oldest because I was so young and not like in any mental state to raise a child, and was still going in college and all these things. So I have a ton of gratitude for her. But when it came to forgiving her and healing this child wound, healing the wounded child, which is such an important part of the work that I do, I bawled for like hours as I realized the amount of anger and hate that I was holding on to from my mom for being complacent and for being a bywatcher. And when it came to my dad, it was like 10 minutes. I didn't even cry because I had done so much of the like mental work to understand that like he doesn't have power over me. Like, I am not that little girl anymore. What I say doesn't matter. And if it affects him, then that's on him and not on me. But when it came to my mom, I felt this need to protect her more. Like, this is the first time I've been more open about my mom's role, honestly, because it has only been like a week since I processed a lot of this. You guys get to see my transformation as it's happening. I'm not sitting up here on some soapbox talking to you about a lesson I learned 10 years ago. This is a lesson I learned this week. Let's see, any comments? Mm-hmm. Okay, so are there any questions? I feel like I'm kind of done. Like, this, it's a pretty It's a simple yet profound lesson to learn, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight. Is there a reason the things you teach don't apply to her, but can be extended to the rapists, murderers, etc.? Something was to her to not take the action you needed. No, that's what I'm saying, honey. I just didn't realize that I was harboring any negative feelings towards my mom at all. Like, I didn't know that there was any wound there at all to heal until something started coming up around Mother's Day. And then that's exactly what I did. Exactly what I did was to extend that honor and understand that she was born premature in 1952, 3 months premature. I have no fucking idea what sort of scientific, medical, whatever the fuck they had to do to keep her alive in the hospital for those like 2 or 3 months. I know that she had a lot of medical issues when she was younger. I know that but she doesn't really talk about her past either. That's the thing, is that to open that can of worms, to open that can of worms takes courage on her part. So I see my dad as being very courageous for all of the times that he was willing to openly tell me about his childhood. While my mom, I'm not saying that she's not courageous. I'm trying to say that she might have blocked out a lot of it, or even not been able to remember it, because she was also born with what is called tunnel vision. So she could see like this much and had zero peripheral vision. So like go like this to yourself and then make it as small as you can so that you can see like the smallest amount. And until she was like 14 or something, that was how she lived her life. So I know that a lot of the things with my mom are because like she had to be taken care of. Like, she has this victim mentality because she was a victim of her own body. Got it. We're vibing. I'm just realizing it now too from you. Oh, cool. Sweet. Hi, Elijah. So when it comes to my mom, like, again, she wasn't abused, but she had her own thing, like where she was like she was very codependent because she had to be, like, for survival. And once she turned 14, she got her eyesight back. She still has always worn glasses. And, she lived her 20s. She didn't get married till she was 29. So there was like a good 10 years of her life, but she was taking care of my grandpa during that time. He had a stroke. So she went immediately in the way that I had a kid when I was 19 and went from child to mom really fast. She went from child to caretaker really fast and had to flop those roles and start caring for her dad, who had a stroke, and her mom actually developed dementia really young. Young comparatively, like she was in her 60s. Because my parents, they're a lot older than me. Again, comparatively, my son is only 20 years younger than me. My mom was 36 when she had me, and my grandma was like 35 when she had my mom. And so far, like going back down my mom's generation, I'm pretty sure that my great grandma on my mom's side was actually born closer to like the 1870s. Maybe not the 1870s. No, because my grandma was born in like 1912 on my mother's side. So like the epigenetics there. And again, I can apply all of this, and I don't need to know my mom's story. I just need to know that I forgive her for the complacency piece in my childhood, which wasn't something that I even recognized prior to last week, actually, when I learned that as a child, my parents had cast a protection spell on me. They're pagan, and when I was really young, like 10, they were much more like witchy. And we did a lot of rituals and things like that. And I fell off my bike and almost died. And apparently they cast a protection spell on me that I have held right here in my back, like in between these 2 points, essentially, or right where my finger is touching. So the back of my heart, because my heart is right here. So on the left side of my heart, on through the back, from them, they cast a protection spell to protect me from, I don't know. But when you know that your parents live in fear, that they have their own traumas, that they have their own fears, that they have their own shame, that they have their own things that they would never do in a million years, that they have their own things that happened when they were kids that they don't want to happen to you. All of that is actually put into a protection spell subconsciously. Like they didn't even realize, they probably found some protection spell in some book and were like, oh yeah, this is good. And they don't really think about all of this, like, what exactly are you protecting me from? Are you protecting me from dying, falling off my bike again? Because guess what? I haven't ridden a bike since I was 10. I became deathly afraid of them right afterwards, even though all I did was knock out my 2 front teeth. I never fucking got on a bicycle again, ever. So what did they protect me from? Or I wasn't silly. I've never been, nobody who knows me would ever consider me a silly person. I've always had a very dry sense of humor, very dark, sarcastic sense of humor, but never silly. What's his name? Will Ferrell? Fucking hate Will Ferrell. Hate him. All of those movies that he's ever done, because they're so slapstick. Any slapstick comedy, any like the Three Stooges, all that shit was just like gross. I don't like it. Well, when you think about what silliness is actually extreme vulnerability. I now love Will Ferrell. I'm going to go watch some Will Ferrell movies right now. I'm finally going to go watch Anchorman, something that I've never been willing to do before because I didn't like Will Ferrell. And because the silliness made me feel awkward, like that much vulnerability to act like such a full fool in front of other people made me feel awkward. I was that person who, like, in the movies would like, oh my God, he's doing something embarrassing. And I would hide myself from it because I couldn't handle the fucking actor, okay, being embarrassed. Affected me. Again, I'm pretty sure now, because of this protection spell of my parents were trying to protect me from being made fun of even more than I was already being made fun of. I've said this story a lot. I was 6 feet tall since I was in 9th grade. I'm 6 feet tall, 6'1". I had a B cup when I was in 4th grade, which was up to a 36G by 10th grade. I've always been ridiculously intelligent, and not living in Utah was not the predominant religion, which back in the 90s was much more of a big deal than it is now. But I was made fun of. I was wearing glasses. I had this big hair, like a perm, but then they'd cut it so that it was like very like solid line right at my chin. I got made fun of for as long as I can remember. There was someone out there making fun of me for the way that I looked, the way that I talked, the way that I dressed. Because I grew so fast, we shopped at the secondhand store a whole lot. Not because we were poor, but because I would go from like this size to this size in 3 months, and my parents weren't going to invest that kind of money in designer jeans. Again, I live on the Upper East Side of Salt Lake, so that to me was a big deal to not be wearing clothes that were brand new or from the Gap or whatever, and wearing these secondhand clothes that maybe some old lady was wearing before, because I had to shop in the women's section and I had to do all these other things. So I understand, again, I can understand and forgive my parents for casting the protection spell. And on Mother's Day, I actually asked my mom to take it off. And her response was, why don't you want to be protected anymore? Well, if you guys watched my video the other day, it's because no one and nothing has power over me. So please remove this protection spell from me. Please take it off. I don't need to be protected from your fears and your anxieties and your worries. I don't need to be protected from mine. I need to live my life fully, completely, and without any reservations or fear of shame. I come out here and I tell these stories so that other people can hear them and say, oh my God, I'm not alone. Because that's the one thing about women especially. We can't stand being alone. It triggers something deep, deep, deep inside of us that goes back to the primal ages of women being gathered together around the fire, holding down the village, and men being off. Like, they would leave the village as a group, but then once they were there, they were usually splitting off and being alone. Men are very highly sensitive. Men can't stand the term, honey, we need to talk. It triggers hyperarousal inside of them. Hyperarousal is something that they developed on a genetic level when they were out in the bush and had to be sensitive to hearing something or noticing something out of the corner of their eyes that could be attacking them. So Instagram, I'm going to lose you. I love you. So a little baby boy can't hold your eyesight because of the hyperarousal, because they're literally genetically wired that way, where you'll be holding him and keeps looking away like every 15 seconds or something, and that's just because they're being aroused and triggered on a very, very deep genetic level because of how men were, like how they evolved differently than women. And baby girl, you can hold her gaze for a lot longer, and she's going to try to get your gaze back. If you look away, she's going to feel shame from you looking away, versus a baby boy is the one who's going to be trying to look away from you because he's hyper aroused. So with women, telling these stories and sharing these stories actually helps us to not feel alone. We're triggered, our shame and anxiety is triggered by not being taken care of, by not being, by being alone, by being destitute, while a man's shame and anxiety is triggered by not being able to provide, by not being able to meet his own standards. So right then you've got that men are from Mars, women are from Venus sort of mentality, which is why you will see a lot of coaches that like only work with women, and they're usually women, and a lot of coaches that only work with men, and they're usually men. While I say that I'm a pleasurable parenting coach because I understand parents and I understand children. I have 2 boys and a girl. When I was learning over the last couple of years about childhood development, I learned how boys development and I learned how girls develop. So that way I can help dads and I can help moms equally. Yes, we talk about different things. I don't usually have to talk to guys about masturbating. They kind of got that one down. But there's other things that we talk about, like vulnerability and that you don't need to fix everything. And women, a lot of the time we talk about the sensuality part and we talk about those things. But that's just something, again, this is my genius. This is what I streamline. This is the reason why I have incarnated this time around, is to teach these things. And it starts with you. It starts with you believing that you are worth moving towards your dreams. It is you deciding you are worth honoring enough to do the work. So a lot of people who are commenting on my thread, and I'm just going to end with this, a lot of people who are commenting on my thread said, well, I've done that, but I would never tell them. Okay, that's great. That's your choice. It is completely your choice if you are good with the relationship that you're at with your parents. But if at some point in your life, you start getting this gnawing feeling that like for me, my dad's turning 60 next week, so that was another thing. I knew that he never expected to live this long. My mom's going to be 68, which I know isn't very old, but when you know that her parents died before their 70th birthdays, it's one of those things where you're like, maybe there's some things that I don't want her dying without me saying to her first. And she could live another 30 years and fucking great. Then our relationship is amazing for the next 30 years. But I did that because I needed to. Not because I think that every person out there needs to go run and buy a stone for their mother and go forgive her, but because it was what my soul was calling me to do, to create a physical representation. And I listened to my intuition no matter what, because my intuition is what has gotten me to where I am in the last 2 years. If I didn't listen to my intuition, I'd still be sad. I'd still be angry. I'd still be a size 16. I'd still be hating my life. I honestly probably might have committed suicide by now. Like, it was bad. It was really, really, really fucking bad. And that's the reason why I started any of this, was because I couldn't keep going the way that I had been going. And there had to be something that changed. And it started with gratitude. And then it moved on to some soul work. And then I did some past life work. And like, we didn't even get into it, but a lot of the shit that happened with my dad when I was a kid was actually unresolved karma from a previous lifetime when I abused him. Because once you start working in this world of quantum realms and quantum realities and past life and whatever, like, There's a reason why you choose the family that you're born into for a reason. The lessons that you learn as a child are for a reason. And anything that you say otherwise is just your ego, because your true higher self can't be hurt. Your true higher self doesn't know what judgment is. Your true higher self trusts unconditionally, forgives unconditionally, and loves unconditionally. And it is our sacred duty on this journey to come to know our higher selves, not to continue living in our ego. Okay, let's see. I'll hide under the table in embarrassment at restaurants for the birthday song for other babies. Yeah, totally, honey. Totally refuse to do that. Are there any final questions? Because I was in the bath before this, and now I've been on here for an hour, so I want to go hang out with my family. Give you guys all a moment. You rock. Lots of love coming. Hey, Cindy, you're still here. Awesome. Thank you. If you guys have any questions or anything, you want to talk to me, you want to reach out, you want to any of those things, reach out. I also know that a lot of people out there who might not have kids don't think that I will coach them because I'm a parenting coach. That's not true. I am here to serve anyone who is living in their wounded child. And that might mean that you get to a point where you will have children later and you want to have already processed this shit before you had them. Or maybe you're choosing not to have kids because you know that your childhood was really fucked and you don't want to pass that on. So please don't think that just because I, for the most part, teach parents that I'm not going to work with you just because you don't have kids. You could have fur babies, you could have angel babies, you could have all these different things. So please, if you feel called that I can help you in your journey, then please don't hesitate to reach out and talk to me. And with that, I love you all. Enjoy your Sunday.